Okay, so I've just read an interesting report from the I newspaper. It's a link that's been posted on Facebook from the I newspaper. I'm just going to read this report out. It's not very long. This is word for word from the I newspaper. Edinburgh can't afford to ban its sauna sex trade. Not everyone is fond of the world's oldest profession, but that doesn't give Scotland's new consolidated police force the right to sweep thousands of individuals under the rug. It's no secret that Edinburgh saunas tend to sell punters a little bit more than just a nice massage or a healthy steam. It never has been. In fact, the City Council has turned a blind eye to what goes on in these establishments for the last 30 years and agreed to license them as entertainment venues so long as they were quiet, unassuming and didn't cause a bother. In turn, sex workers were kept out of sight and given a safe environment to which to practice their trade. All of that is about to change. Now Scotland's new decentralised police force is dead set on killing the arrangement, and the plan is bound to blow up in the city's face. After holding a public consultation, Scottish police chiefs have apparently decided that the city's permissive view of saunas poses a severe reputational and financial risk to Scotland's top travel destination. Yet as more and more tourist dollars continue to pour into Edinburgh each and every year, something doesn't seem quite right here. Despite the fact that these neon-coloured establishments aren't particularly hard to find, they don't seem to chase anyone away from the old town. After all, the record 1.9 million festival goers who descended upon Edinburgh for the Fringe Festival last August. So I'm just making sure that I'm still aligned to the camera. After all, the 1.9 million festival goers who descended upon Edinburgh for the Fringe Festival last August didn't seem to mind. Executives at Virgin Money don't seem to care either, as they've recently agreed to renew the lucrative sponsorship deal with the festival for another 3 years. And Hogmanay revellers, something tells me they couldn't care less. So let's not kid ourselves. This isn't about how sex work affects Edinburgh's sterling reputation or its enviable tourist trade. It's about how one overly centralised police force is choosing to address what should be a devolved city-specific decision. When Scotland's 8 police forces decided to merge last year, the government vowed the nation's new single police force would continue operating in devolved city-specific clusters. Yet as we're forced to sit and watch Edinburgh's delicate but tolerable sex trade being targeted just as Glasgow's was 10 years ago, it's hard to take that pledge seriously. Like it or not, what works in Glasgow doesn't necessarily work in Edinburgh, and as crime continues to rise in the Scottish capital, there are claims it's become crystal clear that the country's consolidated police force is not basing its approach on what does and doesn't work in Edinburgh. In the last 5 years, there have been just 9 reports of crime in the city's dozens of saunas. That's because these establishments provide pseudo-regulated places in which sex workers are relatively protected from exploitation and abuse. That in itself is invaluable, and the city can't afford to let it go. If the Edinburgh City Council decides to bow to the will of police chiefs who don't seem to understand the unique dynamic of power in Edinburgh, will it stop women or men from prostituting themselves? Of course not. What it will do is push them into unlicensed establishments where they will be subject to unchecked abuse. Worse yet, more still will end up in the streets, exposing themselves to all manner of mistreatment and violation. Or in police speak, they actually will start posing a reputational risk to the Royal Mile. Because at the end of the day, that's what really matters, isn't it? Now, there's no dancing around it. Now, everyone is fond of the world's oldest profession, but that doesn't give us any right to sweep thousands of individuals under the rug. Edinburgh's sauna workers will keep on doing what they do with or without a licence. Therefore, is it not more trouble than it's worth to displace them? Whether Scottish police bosses would admit it or not, their actions stand to do serious damage to a situation that is, if not perfect, at least stable. They would do well to keep that in mind before kicking open this particular hornet's nest. And the writer for that article is Nige Riggins. That's today, recently posted. Okay, that's in the I newspaper, the Independent. So just to share my thoughts on the situation, for some time I've believed that prostitution should be regulated, and this to me is just further weight to that argument. that figure was 9 crimes in 5 years. That's very, very little. 9 reported crimes in 5 years and dozens of saunas. Now, in terms of reputation, I wasn't even very familiar with this. I've been to Edinburgh in my life, somewhere like 7 times, and I wasn't even that familiar with this trade. So it's by no means glaring in the public eye. It's not like Amsterdam where you can see sex workers in window shops. So it's quite well hidden, but obviously it's well known within the city. It just seems like madness to drive this underground because of a perception that it damages Edinburgh's image. Now, Edinburgh is the second most visited city in the United Kingdom, and yet it's only about the 10th largest by population. That demonstrates that Edinburgh has a very healthy tourist trade. So clearly the existence of these saunas haven't damaged that. And as the report indicates, that's not damaging the tourist trade. But if we're going to look at deeper issues into that, let's look beyond just image, because that's not the only issue here, and in my opinion isn't the most important image. It's about, let's say, the morality of the situation. Now, I believe in a perfect world prostitution wouldn't exist. In a perfect world, people would have sexual intimacy, and no money would be involved. That would just be the way it is. But sex workers get involved in the sex trade for a wide variety of reasons. And clients go to sex workers, obviously for sex, but I believe that the motivations are not always as black and white as they're made out to be. I still stand by the point I've made in other videos, which is the phenomenon of involuntary celibacy, or perpetual celibacy, is massively underestimated. You get sort of one side of the equation which tends to be sort of vilifying men who visit these sex workers as like there's this generalization, oh, they all must be abusive, or I think the majority of clients just want sex. They have no intention of being abusive to the women involved. And as the writer says, the situation probably isn't ideal. You can never have an ideal situation when sex and money are involved. But surely this has to be better than these women working on the streets, where they really would be subject to potential violence, to all sorts of things, to be controlled by violent pimps, you name it. One argument I often see from people opposed to, who believe that prostitution should be criminalised, is what if that was your sister or your daughter or something like that? Well, like I say, it's not an ideal situation. In a perfect world, women, and some men for that matter, would not feel the need to sell their own bodies. But I strongly believe that people should have a right to do what they want with their own bodies, provided it's consensual, provided they're not being exploited, provided they're adults, and provided it's a consensual situation. Now, I'm not going to beat around the bush. It's no secret that within the sex industry there is a very dark side to that. Human trafficking is involved, exploitation is involved, abuse is involved, some really terrible things. But I am fairly sure that if you just criminalise it, these women, you need to look into the reasons why they're doing it. And I think it's a bit like when people talk about the problem of unemployment, but no one bothers to ask the unemployed themselves. Likewise, when we talk about the sex trade, it seems fair to me to ask the sex workers themselves their opinion. You get other people moralising what they think is best for them, but in the end of the day, I think that's rather patronising. Surely they have as much right to anyone to decide their own destiny, to decide what they want to do in life, provided their actions are not hurting others. I've been to Edinburgh, and these places are not glaringly obvious. It's not like they're, young children can see them in broad daylight. Sex is a fundamental human desire. In my opinion, it's also a human right. And I firmly believe that. I firmly believe that consensual adult sex is a human right. Everyone has a right to intimacy. So denying people an opportunity for that seems aggressive. It seems misplaced, and it seems frankly immoral. What right does anyone have to legislate on what adults decide to do between themselves if their actions are not hurting others? Now, if this was a problem whereby there was a clear situation where it was attracting high crime, where there were many reports of violence against the women involved, that might be a cause for really looking into this. But 9 crimes in 5 years. Now, some people might say, well, the women aren't reporting crimes if they do happen. Okay, I can see that's a possibility. But I still stand by basically the argument that this is the world's oldest profession, and whatever you do, they're going to continue soliciting their bodies, and men will continue to visit them. Now, I think it would be a stupid situation if we do what's happening in France and Sweden and criminalise clients, and then you just push the sex workers out into the street, because all that does is makes life harder for the sex workers, because they're then driven into the hands of organised crime, who will control them. And I think it's wrong to criminalise men for engaging in consensual adult sex. By all means, punish rapists, punish men who abuse women. I've nothing against that. But if a man pays for sex that's a consensual trade, I don't think he should be punished. If he forces himself on her, any woman, sex worker or otherwise, that's different, that's rape. But when we're talking about clear consent, the idea that someone should be punished for that just seems ridiculous. And if you cut off the demand factor, which is the clients, then these women they have no trade. And in many cases, for example, if they are dependent on drugs, if that is one of the scenarios whereby then they might find it hard to be employed in other trades. Now, I don't think this is an ideal situation. I'm no big fan of the sex trade. I just think that having a regulated sex trade, which provides a safe environment for everyone, where you would have security if things do get rough, etc., where there would be a clearly defined income for these women, i.e. will they get a bulk of the pay and so on. If that is clearly regulated, then I don't see why on earth the Central Police Force would want to change that. Now, it'll be interesting to see if this goes ahead, what implications it will have for Edinburgh, and it will be interesting to see if it goes ahead, to look a few years down the line if there's been an increase in crime against sex workers. It will be interesting to see what happens. I think it's a huge mistake. I share the view of the writer in this article. Let me know your thoughts, but sexual intimacy is something that I believe every human being has a right to offer their body and to gain sexual intimacy from someone else in a mutually agreed situation. If we're talking about exploitation, if we're talking about women abused, if we're talking about human trafficking, which are all very real issues, that's different. And I'm not so naive to say that some of that might not exist within this setup. There may well be women in there who are exploited or victims of human trafficking, etc. And I have no problem with police acting in those cases if they have the intelligence to act on those cases. But criminalising the entire trade, to me, where there have been examples of that happening, there's been crimes against women. Look at the Suffolk Strangler case a few years ago. 5 sex workers murdered, and from what I understand, the sex trade is illegal in Suffolk. Well, it's illegal in England. It's illegal to solicit, and look at the results. So I think this is going to backfire. Let me know your thoughts. I'll put a link to the article as well.